Sorry, well, we're starting. Sorry, I didn't even we're so behind anyway. I don't know. They might not let me be on here past 9 though, but so we'll see. Okay. Oh, let's get you more on the screen. Yeah. Hello, everyone. We are here together in Bali. We were going to be doing this separately and had of course, a technology glitch in Bali. So here we are together in a much more beautiful spot than I normally am. Usually I've been in the white Skype room. So welcome to episode number, just pulling this up on my phone, episode number 33 of Exploring Genuine Transformation. My name is Lori Beth, and this is a show that I've been doing for about 8 months now, interviewing different thought leaders, coaches, healers, all in the realm of transformation and looking at transformation from the inside out to have more of an in-depth relationship with self, with life, transformation for the sake of having more freedom and more peace, as opposed to getting what we want in life. Sometimes that's a natural byproduct of simply connecting more with self and our world. So I'm really excited today to be interviewing Ajaya Sommers. Welcome.
Happy to be here with you.
I wonder if we want to get you, I just want people to be able to, I mean, we're talking to each other, but I want people to be able to see you. And we're going to be talking about Ajaya's body of work, which is called Core Embodiment. And I'm really excited for this conversation. When Ajaya first came to Ubud, we had a very brief conversation about her work, and I just really felt lit up by it. It feels like it's extremely unique, and what would I say? I just, as she was starting to share with me about it, this, and she'll talk way more about it in this interview, but the work of these really, the work of just staying so close to self and having really specific ways to do that. And so we feel way more grounded and rooted in who we are. I just felt super lit up by it. So I'm really excited for this conversation and for all of you to learn more about the beautiful work that she's doing and the course that she's actually about to begin tomorrow. And she'll talk more about that in the interview. So to start, I would like to introduce you to Ajaya in case you are not familiar with her. And as I've been doing lately, I'm just going to read her bio because it's just perfect. I've just been enjoying reading people's bios and you getting kind of the heart of them. So Ajaya is a gifted healer, teacher, writer, and creative catalyst in the field of embodied awakening. For the last 26 years, she has been instrumental in facilitating conscious evolution in hundreds of people's lives. All of her programs are grounded in science, expanded through devotional practice, and made real through direct experience. Within a field of unconditionally loving presence, Ajaya facilitates and transmits a unique discovery process called Core Embodiment. She is a certified biodynamic craniosacral integration teacher, NARM practitioner, as well as an authorized continuum teacher. So from there, we'll get started. And I'm thinking, like we talked about, that maybe, especially after we've had kind of this
we had a bit of a tech kerfuffle this morning.
Yeah. But the core of your work is this experiential. Yes. So would you like to start by leading us in an exercise?
Yes. Yeah. Just want to say I'm honored to be here with you, and thank you for inviting me. Yeah, and thank you whoever's showing up with us for being here with us.
Yeah. Let's actually make this bigger.
So yeah, we're here in Bali, and I felt like it would be really beautiful to attempt to transmit some of the field that we're sitting in to all of you. So we'll just take a couple minutes to settle together and just put your feet on the ground. Let the palms of your feet just kind of spread open and find those 2 points of your sit bones. So if you can adjust yourself on your chair. So just maybe wiggle a little bit so you can feel those 2 points. And then from that, you can feel how your spine can just naturally grow a little taller, a little more space for your heart to breathe. And just take a deep breath, let your eyes close. And just a subtle adjustment, just let yourself sit back in your seat. So just a sense of dropping down and into your sits bones, letting the next breath descend into your belly. And if you like, you could just even make a little contact around your hara, just a hand or both hands. So feeling the touch of your hand somewhere around your navel and breathing into that touch. And as you exhale, just a sense of softening and settling. Another deep breath into your touch, letting your belly expand. And as you exhale, just a sense of softening down into the earth. So one more breath like that, just really giving yourself a generous, expansive in-breath. And a sense of letting go on the out-breath, letting go of any excess tension or holding or gripping. And just begin to let your consciousness that may be more up in the head or the eyes, just to start to descend down, feeling again your sits bones, extending into these long bones of your legs, down through the palms of your feet, and just allowing a kind of receptivity to the space beneath you. Let your awareness expand down into this quality of contact with Mother Earth, just allowing this kind of receiving this field below. Continuing to let your out breath just be a way of softening, settling, emptying. And I like to begin all my practice sessions just with the quality of gratitude as we touch in with the ground. We touch in with this field of Gaia, just extending our presence in this way of saying thank you. Thank you for my life. And just really extending this quality of gratitude into your place of belonging, that you have a sweet spot, a place of belonging here that's a part of an ecosystem, a part of a larger organizing intelligence we call nature. So allowing yourself to just exhale and settle and be received as you also extend your gratitude. Thank you for my life. And just take a couple more breaths, allowing this field of intelligence to really come in as this intimate embrace, just feeling the air touching your skin, the sounds in your environment. Allowing yourself to just shed any excess unnecessary tension. Feeling your feet on the ground, feeling your root system settling, and allowing the sweetness of this embrace, just this moment. So there's space, there's room for you just to be here as you are, allowing yourself to begin to receive in this holding ground of support a little more awareness of your own feeling sensation, just the receiving of yourself. You can continue to feel that touch of your hand on your belly, the movement of your breath, ground beneath you, space around you, sweetness of this gratitude, this miracle of life. We can begin to gently open our eyes. Just a soft gaze, and maybe as we go into the session of exploration, we can just continue to explore staying in our seat.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, I feel like a different person.
Beautiful.
I just was realizing that I really want to see if this is also broadcasting to your page. So I'm going to look on your page.
Okay.
And if it's not, it's not. Let me try one thing. Just wanting, I don't know why that's happening lately, so just going to try something. It may not work, but thanks for holding tight. Now I can't even get. Well, you could
probably send it to me afterwards.
Yeah. I just was hoping that people would be able to tune in. Something's going on with Facebook lately. Anyway, yeah, beautiful. I love that we are starting with, getting an actual direct taste of the work that you do. And I guess the first question I have is just, as you kind of led us through that, is there anything, like, what feels most alive for you to share kind of about the practice of core embodiment? I mean, maybe getting into like what it is a little bit would be a good place to start, from there.
Yeah, this morning I was, prior to our meeting, I was just dropping into my own practice, and I was realizing that, I think we take for granted that we know what the word core even means. And so I thought it might be useful just to even define a little bit what I'm referring to when I'm speaking of the core and embodying the core. I was reflecting on how, inherently as human beings, we inherit the DNA of our ancestry, which for all of us at this point, there's some degree of trauma that we're inheriting. And I would say pretty much everyone, unless you're from some other star system, and and so when I'm referring to the core, I'm referring to the dimension of our being that's implicit in actually the development of our human organism. The way we develop in utero is we develop around a fulcrum, or a line of what we call dynamic stillness. So this is kind of cranial speak. But essentially, about 2 weeks after conception, after conception, we're just cells dividing and subdividing, and it's called mitosis. And we're this beautiful liquid crystalline blastocyst of pure potential. And about 2 weeks after conception, this line of energy emerges. out of nowhere, sometimes called the finger of God.
Mm.
And in the core of that line of energy is this bioelectric tone that's dynamic and still and radiant. And in my memory of this, when I started studying this stuff, it was like I had a kind of an ignition, a memory, knowing that is what's landing as I am, as the I am presence, as the essence of my being. That's actually the potency or the intelligence that's giving the instructions. Yes, the DNA is there and the genes are there and there, but they're like the building blocks. It's this potency that's actually that unique spark of life that's unique to you and me and every single individual, that essence. And so we are most essentially that, as in terms of an identity, we are that presence that came here to have an experience in a human body that on some level chose those parents and that background and that storyline. And from my perspective, we're each here to, in a way, transmute, integrate, embody that original wholeness through the process of our story, of our traumas, of our ancestry, of our cultural conditioning. And so all that's in our tissues, and it's imprinted in our early experiences and in our language, in our culture. And I think that if we go about our journey where we actually are consciously in touch with that original template of wholeness, that is actually prior to our conditioning and prior to the storyline. It's ancient. It's billions and billions and billions and billions of years old of an evolutionary process that's unfolding as life. And everything that's alive has a drop of that in it. Right? And so when I'm speaking of the core, I'm speaking of accessing that original quality of potency, of aliveness, of vitality, of wholeness, and actually referencing that as when I talk about our true seat, taking our true seat, or embodying the core, it's that I'm fundamentally inhabiting that as my identity.
Ooh, I love that. That's so beautiful. Yeah.
And so then from there, I'm witnessing, I'm experiencing, I'm allowing my human experience.
I love the way you describe that too, because it's like I'm feeling it as like that spark, which is both like it's like spiritual and energetic and also physical, right? Because so much of what you teach is like how you can inhabit yourself somatically,
Yes.
but that it's all of it. It's like that. Yeah, I somehow have this. It's like I sort of see it almost as this kind of unfolding like seed, you know, like there's all these like parts to who we are.
Layers.
Yes. Yeah. Layers. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if we're caught in a layer that's like more out in the periphery of an identification, right? A perception, a point of view, we have less of a chance to navigate this plane with, with grace, with a kind of quality of, I mean, life's life, and there's grit, and there's grace, and there's hardship, and there's all of it. But my passion, my excitement, my devotion is that I do find that when we're the more we grow this tangible space of the core, it's like we grow a capacity to have more resilience, to allow ourselves to actually be this kind of transmutation space where all of our experience, and after a while it actually kind of even goes beyond our personal experience. We become a part of a collective, we bond or we join more with a collective process that's also happening.
So when you say that, what I think of is it's like that core embodiment, like all, and we'll get more into the practices that you teach, but sort of embodying that. I mean, I am seeing it in layers, like that place where you might get triggered, that's conditioning is way out here, right? But then the more that we can embody our kind of core identity, I mean, you could call it your core identity, or then, like you said, like we're able to then sort of, that's where we're able to meet all of life, like meet all of our experiences is from this kind of like settled grounded, depthful core. I don't know the words, but
I love this term, perceptual integrity. So it's like your core, and I like to focus on particularly developing the hara and the heart and the head brain. Ultimately, they're one core coherence, but they each have their own sort of flavor of perception that you can tap into. And I think that when we actually develop all three, because as Western people, we tend to be pretty in our heads. And, it's a little bit more acceptable to be in the heart these days. But for Western people, the hara is pretty undeveloped. And so I focus a lot on that area. It's what allows us to feel connected to the earth plane and our walk here. And it's what allows the heart to feel safe, to relax, to open. And so if our root and our belly are, in kind of a chronic state of shock and freeze and pulled up and frozen, then the heart's kind of like, also just like, there's no room for me. And then the head's basically trying to manage everything.
Wow.
And that's pretty much what's going on.
It's also like a perfect description of how trauma works, right? Because we're on it's like on a fundamental level, and even like in the nervous system and in our physiology, we're sort of reacting to life this way in the body. Yeah.
Right. There's it's kind of a lockdown. There's no receptivity. So when I look at how we were designed as little embryos, we're designed to be a flow through, like a toroidal flow through, where we're receiving energy from the earth magnetic field from below. That's actually nourishment on a cellular level. Like we need that for every metabolic process in the body. And then we're designed to receive nourishment from above. And if we're, blocking from above and from below, and we're just kind of in this collapsed from my
So
Are we on?
That was interesting. Let's see if we're on again. We seem to be back on. Yeah, and on the same, I think, on the same screen. So we're having, this is Bali. We're having
Mama Nature.
We're having all
here.
kinds of, it appears as though we're live again. So hopefully that's what's happening. So
I was describing the core.
And
why we would want to embody that.
Do you have more to say on that?
Well, sure, endlessly, but I think I felt maybe, anything you want to pick up on or tease out.
Well, it's interesting. I think as I listen to you, it's like, I feel it. I feel what you're saying so strongly. So yeah, my sense is that was actually a really good kind of description. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in that regard. Do you want to go more into kind of how some of the ways that you work to help people to get in touch with their hara and their heart, and like to sort of move into the body and really create this core embodiment?
Yeah, it is very experiential. So I can't I can't go into the whole practice here today. But essentially, let's see, I could describe for myself I, from a young age, um, started studying cranial like in my early 20s and craniosacral work. And that system essentially is our core system, the cranial, the cerebrospinal fluid that encloses the brain and wraps around the spinal cord. It is our primary breathing system. And so as we developed as little embryos, it's essentially the first system to come online. And that breathing motion is essentially the movement of life. It's a an involution and an evolution. It's this breathing motion. So prior to our lung breath, we actually, as little embryos, were being formed in the amniotic fluid, in this fluid-filled space through this beautiful, breath motion. So for me, early on, it was like I had my hands on that system, and it started to become my teacher, and it was teaching me how to listen and to feel from my core. A lot of the practices in biodynamic cranial were actually they're perceptual rather than mechanical. So we're learning how to perceive by resting in the center of the head, by resting in the center of the heart, by resting in the center of the heart. So that was a lot of my early education. And as I was in that early education, over time, I just started to, it was like an awakening, a remembrance that this is what actually connects us to all of life. As we inhabit this core space, we become available, or we become a target for this interconnected, basically communication system that's happening through water. Most everything that's alive is comprised of water. And water is an ancient intelligence that we don't even understand yet. So as I was tapping into this, cerebrospinal fluid that's basically like the wellspring in your body compared to the salt water of your blood, it just started to show me more and more and more. And over time, this practice just came in layers, where at first it was going back into that movement pattern. And it was as if I was going back into the womb and could access that original template. So I started to learn how to, in a way, give myself a cranial session. And then I got really inspired when I started teaching my own version of cranial work. I wanted to bring in something that was empowering for people. And at that point, I started studying with Emily Conrad, who is the founder of Continuum. So I started bringing in sound, and very particular sounds that are, many of the sounds from Continuum come from ancient mystery schools, from Tibet and Egypt and Greece. And so the sounds are a way to, dissolve constricted tissue, dissolve where those holding patterns are that are psychospiritual and that are bound, in our tissues, where our stories are bound. Nothing like sound can go in and actually penetrate and permeate and dissolve some of those holding patterns. So that was really exciting. And then over time, it just, some years ago, I went to write my book, and I was in Maui in Hawaii, and I knew that I had another level of kind of re-umbilicalizing or bonding with Gaia. I knew there was some way that I was not quite like fully in it, that I was kind of outside of myself. And I knew I needed to be in a field of nature that was stronger than California. And so I went there, and essentially what I call core embodiment came to me as I let myself be there. And every day just spend hours just diving in. And so the practice itself now keeps evolving, but essentially it's a meeting place of awareness, touch, like how I had you just start to feel in your belly, bringing awareness, touch, sound vibration. Essentially, we are pattern interrupting the way we breathe. And the way that we fix and hold our habit patterns in our tissues is through our breath signature. So it's very powerful for shifting the way we breathe, and thus shifting the way we're organized, thus shifting the way we're identified as a self. And when we start to access more of that fluidity and openness and receptivity and availability, then we're available for our creative channel. We're available to actually be a channel again, to receive, our unique instructions, our unique inspiration. And I think that's where, as human beings, we thrive, where we're happiest.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I love the depth at which you're speaking about this, like throughout this whole conversation. Just in terms, I just keep getting this sense of like, just how what you're teaching kind of, it just embodies like every level of our being, like what you just said, like including, it's like, how connected are we to like Gaia? How, how connected are we to all the different processes in the body, and how those processes repeat themselves, right? Like that there's like what you're teaching sort of is our, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's like, it is our natural, innate. Yeah. It's like, it's like getting to the core, which is a good word for core, right? It's getting to the core of like all the different processes that have actually been, with us since we've been in the womb, and probably, I mean, even beyond that, right? And actually helping people to access all of these different dimensions within our beings so that we can, like have an in-depth moment to moment experience of, kind of who our core self is. And also, I keep the word that you haven't used, this word like grounding. I don't know what words you use to describe like what the, how this practice kind of supports kind of the moment to moment connection with self and presence and all of life, but I can just feel as you're talking about it, right, that like the more, actually I have just from the first exercise, like I feel more rooted in my core, and I notice how much kind of the energy, I just like how settling that is, how soothed I feel, how much like how all the energy is kind of going into it actually feels like in my hara, and how like there's something about that it's like almost like I'm, yeah, like that it allows me a connection to everything, to you, to like this environment that we're in, to myself. So yeah.
I think, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that I get the most like excited about, and I feel kind of it's missing in a lot of, meditative practices, psychospiritual practices, is that it's sort of abstract, like this waking up thing. It's an abstraction, and I think that waking down and in there is a tangible location, and we're designed to abide in this tangible location, this core referencing of I am here. We're meant to be here in our body in this moment, right? And so that's what allows, an awakening open to life. But if I'm not actually here in a way that feels safe and whole, and, like, I mean, I think that there's some purpose to the traumas that we go through. The Hopi call them the sacred wound. We all come in, with some appearance of splitting off from the truth of who we are. And then there's a journey, right? There's so many, archetypal myths and stories that talk about this. But I think that original design, creator's design for us, is actually to feel a place of belonging, of connection, trust. Trust is the currency of that connection. We're designed to feel, to be a flowing, fluid organism, to have a fluid identity, to not be this fixed, rigid thing. We're constantly evolving and growing. And to me, that's love. Like, that's the functioning of love. That's what love does. That's what love is doing here. And so we could say that's our fundamental identity. And so when we join with that in a way that's not abstract and conceptual, but we actually feel it, one, it's incredibly healing. It's incredibly unifying.
Unifying.
And it's the basis of genuine intimate relationship with ourselves, with each other, with our purpose, with the larger field. I think it's pretty difficult to really be in a genuine relationship with anyone or anything if it's not coming from that place. So to me, it's kind of like that's the work, is backing up and reclaiming that space. And then everything else comes really naturally. It's not like this effortful trying to figure out who you are or what you're here to do or who your partner is, or, you know, it's like,
which all comes from the mind.
Yeah, it comes from feeling cut off. And then the mind is over managing.
Yeah. 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 So it's like what you're teaching is really, and it's an interconnectedness, you know, to the whole of life. And it's like again, I just keep having the same sort of words come through, that it's like layers, or like I almost see it as like a system. You know, you're like tapping into like the system of our organism and helping people to really kind of you know, make use of like everything that is available to us to be in that interconnected whole, you know, whether it's like with all the parts of self, or, you know, our world or other. And that from that, then there's like those, like you said, those inspirations, those creativities, those like, it just feels, it's like the obviousness of like, oh yeah, this is my next step, you know. I am really curious because, and I know you say, you know, even in your bio, you talk about sort of being in the field of embodied awakening, and then you were just referencing awakening, and yeah, I'm curious if you want to define what you see as awakening, because obviously there's like, I mean, I've had many people on this show who've talked about awakening,
Right.
and you know, and you started to, and I just think, you know, like sort of like you know, how do we not normally, but like, you know, awakening can mean so many different things. Yeah. So I'm curious what you mean by that.
I mean, I think I touched on it in the beginning when I was referring to how I define the core. And that our core identity, if you will, is this presence of being that is awake, that is here, that is resting in a self-abiding, non-separate dimensionality, you know, that's both, you know, uniquely like this essence. I think that's the beauty of it, is that over time, you know, I think when I was younger, I thought awakening was like this standard, this thing that everyone experienced in the same way. But I think that actually the awakening journey and the embodiment of that awakening is very unique for each of us, because it's the very process of allowing, you know, our fate, if you will, to become our destiny, to become, to allow like the forces of our destiny, of our essence, of our being, to actually infuse into our fates. And so that's a very intimate and unique journey for each person. But at the, you know, at the fundamental level, there is the same mysterious, you know, vitality, potency, spark of life, of consciousness. We could call God, we could call love, that seems to have this organizing directionality or functionality or care in its consciousness, its mind. And so I feel like my sense is that what we call awakening is the recognition or the remembrance or the infusion of that. Now that can happen in, you know, moments. Like in my early, you know, in my 20s and 30s, I did a lot of meditation retreats, and there would be these, you know, and then I would go back to, quote, my life, right? And so I think that really these days it's about the integration or the embodiment, so that that's lived in a very human and practical and down to earth way. And I think these days it's not so much about this personal awakening so that I'm in a state of bliss or unified consciousness or, you know, la la la. It seems like that functionality of love is very interested in it's this kind of infectious, contagious force that wants to keep including more and more and more of itself. And it seems to be about this service to this greater wholeness of itself, you know. And so I think these days that's interfacing with, you know, our climate, what's before us, what's upon us, what we're in, you know, and how do we allow that intelligence to actually be intimate with what's here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I'm hearing it as like it's the, I mean, you said it well, like it's like when everything comes into unification. And for you, that's through the body, obviously through all of these practices, right? Which I think has been lacking in a lot of awakening circles, you know, that there's just it's like, oh, you're, you know, like the lack of integration into life can happen, into the rest of life.
Well, we also are still like at a time in evolution where we are very much under the ancient or the old teachings, let's say, like out of India, or, you know, the Advaita Vedanta traditions, or the, you know, a lot of the classical spiritual traditions are very much about we're not the body and we're not the self.
Yeah.
And or even the more, you know, the Western traditions are all about like make God first. So my thing is like, if you actually make your own course being your first priority of attention, those codes are there. They're innate, they're intrinsic, they're in our developmental anatomy. And so it's, in a way, it's like reclaiming all of that's conditioning as well, the spiritual conditioning.
Yeah.
The awakening condition.
Yeah.
So at least from my perspective, I think integration is a really important.
Yeah, and I think there is a movement towards the embodied, you know, just there's a movement in our world towards this more embodied awakening, you know, and less of what you were just, you know, talking about, that is still a part of our, you know, or part of our world. Yeah. And it makes so much sense. I mean, it also makes sense to me on the level of like, you know, if that can come from the inside, in these kind of, even the sort of subtlety and intimacy with these, you know, aspects of our being or with our somatic experience, and it can be integrated into our daily life, that like that's right, like that's where the rubber meets the road, right? It's not just like, oh, I had this experience off on a mountain, you know, here I am living this. And I mean, in my experience too, that when it comes from the depth of my somatic experience and my, you know, there's something else that it feels like there's a unification that's like of the whole. I feel it that way.
There's a nourishment too.
Yeah. That's a great word. We haven't used that. Yeah.
Because I think that the situation we're describing, there's a lot of deprivation and scarcity and lack is part of the pervasive theme. And even some of the like austerities of what's required, how you have to cut off to, you know, wake up, or there's many different levels that it goes on, but I think that in a way we're all recovering from the deprivation.
I think that's true. That's great. That's a great way to say it. Yeah. Yeah, well, this is like not, this is a conversation that's, I mean, this is a, this question that's still kind of arising for me is not, it doesn't sort of sequentially go after this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You know, I know that you talked a little bit in this interview, and I know we've talked about how, you know, that development, that sort of these developmental motifs, that's how you called it, continue on. Like it's not just right in like in the womb, and it's not just in our early childhood. So I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that a little bit. And I'm guessing that you mean like that they keep going on, that they're in nature and they're also in our bodies.
Right.
And so it's not, it doesn't end. It's like a constant, you know, a sort of continual relationship. But that fascinates me.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm teaching, I have pictures that are really helpful to show, you know, where I can actually give you a sense of the geometry and sort of the fractal nature of our development. But let me see if I can think of an example. Well, I was describing earlier that this a torus, you know what a torus is? It's basically like a donut shaped,
Mm.
a toroidal shape, goes kind of like this. So in the, and it's multidimensional, you know, it's like multi-layered. Um, when we were developing in utero, the heart itself, which is basically like our first organ, the blood is our first organ. And the way that we develop, this is a good example, is we develop where our form follows our function. And this is a basic, you know, physiology law called Wolff's law, where for the heart to develop, the body didn't just go, well, let's make a heart. It came online by virtue of a circulation system, these little blood islands, these little pacemaker cells that started beating mysteriously. We don't even really know what starts that, right? But and eventually, to create flow, to create movement, to create circulation, a kind of a relay station developed that we call the heart, and that's a whole intricate, amazing, you know, creation story to share. But a kneecap didn't decide to become a kneecap. You know, it came out of a functioning for mobility and movement. The development of your eyes, every single organ and living tissue in your body came by virtue of these what are called metabolic movements or diffusion fields. And to me, that is profound, just that our whole form is actually an expression of functioning, of movement. And I like to look at how, like, initially this was metabolic, it was physiological, right? It was very physical. But I think that these motifs are actually also kind of imprinting a psycho-spiritual process. So later, as we evolve through our lives, I think one of the big conditioning pieces is that we're very identified with form as being something solid and trustworthy. And we relate to life through forms, ideas, points of view, even something like, you know, you hear people talk about like, well, these are the qualities I want in my partner. There's this whole sort of like objectification of an image, an idea, qualities outside that are going to create something. Whereas if you're in touch with yourself as a movement process, as an evolutionary movement process that's a functioning of a part of a larger whole, it might be true that a partner is right relationship for you, but that's going to evolve out of a functioning, out of a right. But that's a totally different approach than trying to being a subject object, trying to find that thing. Right. So I think that's a big part of our conditioning that we can work with. You know, as little embryos, we're constantly dying to the shape that we were. We have to keep allowing a kind of inner emergence and keep transcending the shape that we were. And so that's another one of these kind of developmental motifs that I think is really important, that for life to live and be fresh and real and genuine, we have to actually allow death. We have to allow change. We have to allow a kind of a surrendering into and letting this mysterious emergence, you know, keep evolving us. It helps to see these pictures because, you know, you can see like the shapes that we take and how we had to keep transcending one shape to become the next.
Yeah, and I think those examples are so beautiful because, again, it's like you're taking what is, I mean, I think motif is a good word, but something that's in our, you know, physiology. It's also in nature, right? And you're saying, like, not only, right, like the last one you gave, it's like, okay, there can be this concept of we're constantly, like, change is inevitable, right? But now you're talking about how that actually lives inside of our, you know, inside of our development, that, and inside of like our patterning, kind of, you know, like our patterning as humans. So again, it feels like to me there's something that's physiological about that and spiritual, but that I could imagine also with what you're teaching, that, you know, as I was listening to you, I was imagining that, you know, if I really was in the depth of your practices, right, that you're teaching, that there'd be a lived experience of exactly what you were just talking about, right? Like that sort of like, not through the mind, but through like, oh wow, I'm doing these practices and this is, I'm like seeing in my direct experience how everything is transformation, or I'm seeing in my direct experience that, you know, things come out of this like functioning, right? Like the relationship example was such a good one, right? Like that could, that like desire or that knowing could come from a much deeper place that's not like I'm looking out and having, you know, using my mind to objectify, which is what we do. And I love that too, because sorry, my mind's just ripping off of this, because also, right, like part of our design is we do see subject object, but we're also, there's this, you know, there's this oneness that's also true, right? And there's, yeah, so it feels like it's all, there's something that's really powerful of that coming out of the nature of who we are, you know, through these developmental processes. It's really powerful.
And it is profound when you actually come into the direct experience of what I'm talking about. That's why my practices are practices, and why they're so experiential, is because it's genuinely transforms your perceptual experience of what you are, what life is, what relationship is. Beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I even have a sense just of sitting here with you and talking about this. I mean, sure, it's like,
it starts to open up.
It starts to open up. Yeah. So it's also this beautiful transmission that happens. Well, it seems like that's actually a good place to end, and also a good place for you to talk a little bit more about the program that you're running, so that people kind of know about it. If this really inspired you and you want to dive into this work, Ajaya is offering a program starting tomorrow.
I know, it's interesting timing. It's called Taking Refuge, and we will be taking refuge in this core, the subtle core space that I'm describing. And we'll be spending 1 month developing the hara. So really cultivating this primary seat. We'll spend another month, the next month, in the heart, and then finally in the the higher brain centers. And ultimately it's about creating again this core coherence, or accessing your experience as more of a flow through organism. I've taught this work many times, but I haven't done it where I've slowed it down like this. And I'm excited being here in Bali, having this ground of nature that feels really supportive for me. So I feel resourced, and I actually have a deeper access to my own teachings. So that's exciting for me. And I will be teaching the practice, but I'll also be teaching some really just simple anchoring, subtle practices you can do on a daily basis. There's a core practice that you could do, you know, every morning, but I'm going to be sharing some really simple little ways of just navigating the field. And, you know, and then it's like what each person brings. Everybody has a different intention and what they're meeting in their life. And essentially it's an intimate container to meet yourself.
Beautiful. And it's an online course, right?
Yes.
So, okay. So if people were interested in that, they could reach out to you directly.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to say what your website is.
My website's just my name, ajayasommers.com, which is AJAYASOMMERS.com. And I'm on Facebook.
Okay. And then are there other ways that people could work with you? Like, do you offer one-on-one containers?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, so you can reach out to Ajaya.
Thank you.
And yeah, so I think we'll end there today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad that we were able to
get the tech and nature to come together.
Yeah, exactly. Bali's really great for grounding in nature and not so great for Wi-Fi. Yeah, so thank you everyone for tuning in, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye.